Hi everyone, I'm Holly Ty, Specification Editor at Assemble Media Group. I'd like to give you all a very warm welcome to Digital Building Week. I'm really excited to be bringing you our first session, which is a masterclass on the Building Boardroom Academy. It's a new initiative for this year, and I'm really happy to be joined by Programme Director Rob Garvey. Welcome, Rob. I thought we could kick things off with an introduction. So Rob, could you start by telling us a bit about your background and experience in the digital construction space?
Yeah, well, thank you, Holly, and welcome everybody. And I'm really pleased to be here and to sort of introduce everybody to the Building Academy. In terms of a bit of a background to me and why I'm here and why I'm standing, my background is I'm a chartered surveyor. I've worked in a variety of projects for a variety of people, so work for clients, consultants and contractors on projects like Terminal 5, so good experience. And I think it was from a digital background, it was really on Terminal 5 that I started to get a good appreciation of digital technologies, what they could do for the industry. And from there, I got introduced to Mervyn Richards, who was really looking to develop standards that enabled the different parts of the projects to be integrated together. And I think when we were on that project on Terminal 5, we were using the single model environment as a term, and that is what became building information modeling. So when I moved into academia, I became a lecturer in 2010. There wasn't actually a lot of information being taught around BIM, and that actually represented a pretty good opportunity for me. And I got involved in numerous things, and that led me to be part of the BIM Academic Forum, as well as taking spells as chair of the London BIM region. So I've got sort of good appreciation of what BIM was all around about. Got myself involved in setting up an MSc in building information management, not modeling, management, as well as leading the first mass open online course on BIM. Got quite a few people involved in that. I'm now working 3 days a week at the University of East London and working on projects like this, the Building Academy, at other times. So, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail, but I think just sort of where I come from, you know, actually, I think I'm like a lot of people in this industry. I love working in it. I think it's a fantastic industry to work in. However, it doesn't always treat us well. And I'm passionate that we look to deliver better outcomes for our clients, but also a healthier working environment for all those actually in the industry. So that's where I'm coming from, and sort of keen to sort of push the boundaries of digital construction.
Thank you. What would you say are kind of some of the bigger barriers for people within the industry who are embracing digital construction, and how do you think those barriers could be overcome?
Okay, so let's take them sort of one question at a time and sort of look at what those barriers are. And I think to answer that first, we really need to appreciate what we mean by digital construction. So for me, what we've got to think about is actually the future of construction will be digital. At some time, we will be in a world that digital will be synonymous for what construction is. It will just be business as usual. And by that, I mean, we'll work seamlessly on digital platforms using digital tools. We won't call it digital construction, we'll just call it construction. That's the way it will be. And I think if you actually start looking at not just construction, but everywhere, you know, for good or bad, digital platforms, digital tools are integral to the way that we live our lives now. And it will be that way in construction. The question really is, at what point will it be? How long will it take construction to get there? So, you know, when these platforms work well, they make our lives so much easier. And just as an example, I had to pay my car tax the other day, and I think it's a fantastic example of seamless digital transformation. So, you know, if you can remember a few years back, I don't know if you can, or if you've ever had to buy your tax at a post office, but you had to go and find your MOT certificate, you had to go and find your insurance documents, and then you'd go down there, hand over a form, hand over the documentation, and they would give you a piece of paper back. So individually, it took you time out of your day and all of that, and where was the proof that you as the car, it was just a little symbol on the car. Now It's all done in a couple of minutes. It's all seamless. It's absolutely fantastic. And I think that to me is a vision of digital transformation as an example that really can work well. So, you know, to answer your question about what are the barriers that are stopping construction being transformed in this way? Well, I think if we've understood that the future is digital, then we've got to appreciate that when we're talking about construction, we're actually talking about an industry that's made up of many different market segments. So, and what I mean by that is, you know, the housing market is quite different from infrastructure. New build is quite different from refurbishment. So any answer that I sort of give here, any generic answer, has to be used with a degree of caution. And I think we've also got to recognize that actually there's huge aspects of the industry that have made big strides. And there is, you know, a lot of the industry that are using digital in some form or other and moving on. So, you know, if we recognize that, you know, the construction does still complete many projects to a client, to good client satisfaction, and we're not all bad, there are plenty of examples of good practice. However, we're still not rated highly on a league of all industries in terms of digital transformation. So we've still got some way to go. So, and I think the other aspects of that is you can do one good project well, but that doesn't mean that success on one project is going to mean that you're going to have success on the next. And I think that is in part one of those significant barriers to the industry changing and adopting digital ways of working. So why is that? What is that? What do I mean? Well, I'd say there's three real generic barriers to me that I'd sort of put across today. And one of those is, you know, a lack of clarity as to why we need to transform. Secondly, dare I say procurement, but procurement practices that really encourage a race to the bottom. And then I think we have a culture that doesn't really value quality. So I'll take each one of those in turn and just sort of elaborate a little bit more. So why don't we want to transform? As I say, you know, the industry's rated last of all industries in terms of digitization, according to a McKinsey survey. Now, I know that might be a few years old, and the pandemic might have actually influenced some change, but for most companies, their level of digital competency is still incredibly poor. And from what I've done and what I see, it's really evident to me that, you know, business as usual for most companies really focus on winning the next job, firefighting to get it completed, firefighting to get paid, you know, and moving on to the next job. So actually there isn't the brain space to actually start thinking about what that future really needs to be about. And I think that's what we've got to start understanding. How do we make some of that space? And in that way, you know, how do we think about what we can do to continuously improve the way that we operate? And I'll come back to that term in a little bit. But in a way, that really sort of is that consequence of not having time, and the way that we operate is really quite significant consequence of the second barrier, those procurement practices. So, you know, it's been clear for a while that we've got a race to the bottom, and it's real. Okay. Right now, we're seeing a record number of companies go out of business, and there's no doubt that, you know, the conditions have deteriorated, and companies in construction are sort of very vulnerable. They're on the edge, and therefore more liable to go into insolvency. They don't have spare cash or anything like that. So as soon as something happens, we see a lot of people go out of the business that the industry desperately needs. And what happened in 2010, I'm actually a victim. Actually, I left my job and went into academia, you know, because of what happened in 2010. A lot of people are potentially leaving the industry now, so we've got this problem of retention, and in part that is the way that the industry operates and procurement practices. Now, what does that mean from a business point of view? Well, obviously it's all about profitability, and that's actually really low, non-existent in a lot of cases. So their ability therefore to invest in their future just isn't possible. You know, they can't invest in people, they can't invest in technology, and then consequently, they're not really investing in their future. So they don't have the time and they don't have the ability to invest in the future. So something's wrong with our generic business model that actually constrains the way that we work. And I think in a way that also precipitates what I see as this poor culture towards quality. So that's the third sort of barrier. And I think I'm really mindful not to want to dwell too much on Grenfell, but just to recognize that Grenfell is a real stark reminder of the consequences that happen in our industry when we get it wrong. Personally, I keep it at the forefront of my mind because I want to make sure students that I'm teaching and anybody that I'm involved in, recognize that this is something that we can't forget. It's an industry we love, but the consequences of Grenfell are on our hands. So we've got to deal with that. We've got to learn from the lessons from that. And right now, what's happening? Well, we've got imminent legislation coming through, which is demanding quality, and it absolutely drives me mad. I just think it's appalling that the industry needs legislation to say we need to build safely and we need to build to good standards of quality. I mean, it is ludicrous, but that's the status of the industry and that's where it's at. So something needs to happen, something needs to change. And I think our attitude to quality is one that I feel like we need to consider and shift that towards one of continuous improvement rather than actually just get the job done. And actually, when I talk about quality, it's not just about the finished product. It is about the way we operate and actually trying to expect and deliver higher standards. We should want to get it right first time all the way through the project. From the initial stages of those projects to the production of good quality tender documents that enable people to respond effectively. And my experience of tender documents that still have the wrong project name in and all this sort of stuff, it's crazy that still happens. And that is some basic information management principles. So quality to me is a big issue. It's one that I think in many other industries, manufacturing services industries, etc., they've made a real connection between the delivery of a quality project and learning from when things go wrong. So I would suggest that we don't always learn, and we don't actually, one project move on to the next and we don't have effective processes to actually learn from. So I would suggest that we're not good at learning from our mistakes and we don't have that culture of continuous improvement. So I know I've rambled a little bit there, so it's probably worth just coming to a conclusion. What I'm saying here is, for me, the key barriers to embracing digital construction are really understanding why you want to change, why you want to be digital. Second, addressing those procurement practices. And three, the fact that we've got a poor attitude towards quality. So I think the second part of that question then was, what are the barriers? Yeah. So how do we overcome these barriers? Okay, so I think if we're talking, we're talking about adopting digital construction or moving towards the future where construction is digital, absolutely. And in part, it's not just about being digital, it's about the generic industry and how we influence change, how we transform the industry. And that's a complex issue. And we've had plenty of government reports that have had limited success in trying to address that, although, constant shifting moving forward. So we do that, and I think that what we're looking at in this country is not dissimilar to what is happening in other countries as well. So the problems we face in the UK are similar in elsewhere, but it doesn't mean that we can't actually solve them. So that said, I think it's important to recognise that we've had all these government reports, but you don't change it at an industry level. You don't change at that level. Change happens at a different level, and for me, that must be at an organisational level. So, a lot of information around digital construction really focuses on the delivery of projects, and again, that makes perfect sense. I don't think there's enough emphasis on how organizations can actually improve their digital competency. And I think if organizations focus on that, then that will then be transferred into projects. As I say, all too often we move from one project to the next without really learning those lessons. And I would like to see an improvement in digital competency at organizational level. And by focusing on that organizational level, I think what you'll recognize and what you'll identify is that you've got plenty of individuals within that organization that are digitally competent. And they probably got a common desire to improve. So recognize those, bring those forward, make sure they're part of any change initiative that you want to take forward. Now, I mentioned the pandemic, and I do see that actually the pandemic spurred us to influence and take on more digital technologies. So like we are now, you know, we're using digital platforms like this, and I think it really drove and made organizations that were resistant to change to recognize, well, actually we can use these tools, and we can use other tools, and we then need to look at how we use our information differently and more effectively. And I think what we are seeing is that, you know, there are a number of initiatives sort of saying, right, okay, let's put digital first. Let's be digital by default as part of their strategy. And I think that's a sensible thing to do, but it's by no means common. And I think my evidence that when I've looked at it is that the majority of organizations really still have quite an ad hoc approach to digital, to their approach to digital, and really they need to be considering developing some sort of digital strategy of some sort to assist in driving that improvement. And I think, again, if we look at other industries, you know, at board level now, there is a position of whether you call it chief technology, chief information, chief data officer. There's somebody responsible at that board level for those aspects of how to manage information, how to manage data, and how all that fits it together in the delivery of their digital strategy. So for me, one of the first questions I'd be sort of pushing to an organization is, have you got a digital strategy or not? And if not, don't worry about it. We can put something together in a way that actually enables them to move forward. And within that, I think part of that digital strategy and that wider business strategy is this third point I'm talking about, this approach to quality, understanding what we've got to do so that we actually improve and drive quality. Now, we are going to have impending legislation that's coming through, so there's going to be a legal requirement to demonstrate competency and, you know, also deliver what I'm not going to talk about it, but a golden thread of information. That's certainly something that we talk about on the course. But this should all be connected in really how we deliver quality throughout that organization. And in part, that definitely means that process of quality. How do we learn from mistakes? So I want to sort of give another example. I've already mentioned Grenfell, and I think the consequence of that has been legislation, and there is an element we are being forced to learn from that failure. I still think it's slightly abhorrent that you know, we need that legislation, and there are still organizations that aren't actually picking up the requirements and actually driving through on what that means. But anyway, I think the example I want to give is going back a few years to 1994, and there was a tunnel that collapsed under Heathrow, and it was in the construction of the Heathrow Express. Now, in that incident, fortunately, nobody was killed, but it did cost BAA, British Airports Authority, significantly in time and money. However, what it did do was actually influence a change in mindset that would be adopted in the construction of other projects, and notably Terminal 5. And that mindset was really based on an acknowledgement that for them, business as usual wasn't going to be acceptable to BAA. The business would probably fail, so they needed to do something different. So there was an imperative there that they change. And the approach that they adopted was actually to set the bar much higher than business as usual. It wasn't to set it at business as usual. It wasn't even to set it at, you know, let's achieve good practice. They were actually looking, right, how can we achieve exceptional performance? And in doing so, it really tried, well, it did abandon those traditional procurement practices and wrote arrangements where they shared risk, they shared benefits, and worked collaboratively, if I could say the word, to deliver the program safely, meeting the quality expectations as well as on time and on budget. And in the main, they did that. And I think as a consequence of that, they've tried to continue with a lot of those arrangements. But many of the individuals that were involved in that project have moved on to delivering the Olympics, taken the mindset of that onto other projects that we potentially see as successful. Similarly, Thames Tideway. I'd love to be able to include Crossrail in that, and I know there's plenty of people that moved on to Crossrail. You know, I think if we look at it, and we're seeing the outcome now of an absolutely magnificent project. You know, it's a magnificent feat of engineering, which unfortunately is going to be tarnished by the fact that it didn't finish on time. And we've got to make sure that we, again, learn the lessons of what actually happened there. So just sort of on that, I think it's within companies' ability to take control of the quality they deliver and actually look to instigate programs of continuous improvement. And actually believe they can change, because often I don't think they believe they can change. They can, absolutely. So the next one, change in procurement practice. Well, that's a much tougher issue, and I'm not really going to delve into too much detail here on that. I'm fairly certain it's something that we can look at as another program on the Building Academy. But suffice to say that actually government's got a real role to play here, and it's got, given its significant expenditure on construction and the fact that it's a major client in its various ways. And I would really like to see, dare I say it, be a little bit political, sort of see a government construction advisor come back, be reinstated, and recognise the work that was done by the first two advisors in the first place. There's no doubt that they instigated change, not least actually pushing forward the drive for BIM. Again, whether we agree with it or not, it's probably a little bit of a Trojan horse, but it did actually influence change and push the industry forward. So I think there's much that can be said for the client advisor role, and not least because of the work that was actually instigated about improving client capabilities within government. And I'd like to see and hope to see that that's starting to influence some change. So I've sort of talked about quality, I've talked about procurement practice, and I was sort of suddenly realizing I'm talking about these in back to front way that I started talking about them. So the sort of final one was, you know, why do companies want to do this? And I think that, you know, individual companies are going to have to review their own reasons. Actually, it's down to them. It's down to them to determine what it is they want to do. But my suggestion and my urge is that actually they've got to recognize that it's going to change, something's going to happen, and they've got to put themselves in the best position to be able to adapt to that. Not least to recognize that there will be disruption, and it will happen just as it has in many other industries. And there are plenty of other examples that, you know, where businesses haven't seen change coming, that with a bit of hindsight, or even with hindsight, the signs were already there. So, you know, organizations have been disrupted by the likes of Netflix, Uber, WeWork, and plenty of others. So those models are out there, and one of them will be coming to construction. And the signs, well, the recent failure of a company called Katara, if you haven't heard of them, then just be aware. Actually, they were trying to be one of those disruptors. Now, they have failed. Is that the end of the world? Well, I'm fairly certain there's people understanding and learning from that failure. They're going to pick those pieces up and they're going to run again. Okay, so others will try, they will succeed, and there will be disruption coming. So all those companies that are out there thinking we can keep doing business as usual will actually, you know, at some point, and probably not in the too distant future, there will be change happening. Okay, so I think that sort of brings that section to an end, and hopefully there's some understanding there about some of the reasons why and the barriers of how we can address some of those barriers.
No, that was a lot of interesting points. One of them being that the future is very much going to be digital. So if you could give people within construction 3 pieces of advice for improving their digital competency, what would those be?
Okay, so that's a good question, and I think, you know, bringing this back to competency, I think it's a term that we're going to increasingly hear, not just because the legislation is there that you're going to have to demonstrate competency. So for me, I think you know you've got to understand why you want to be more digitally competent. So it comes back to that point. And for me on projects, well, it's about delivering better projects with the assurance over quality and over our environment. I haven't really talked about delivering for the environment, but again, that's another real catalyst for change that we need to be aware of. For organizations though, I think, yeah, absolutely, it's about delivering better projects. That goes without saying, but it's also about then looking about what they can do to continuously improve and therefore be more resilient to those changes that are going to come along, as I was just talking about. And individually, I think we can all look at what we can do to become more digitally competent. And in doing that, I think it's about how you can continuously improve what you do, look at what you do and how you then increase value to those who you work with and for. So understanding the why and what you can do about it is one thing. Secondly, and I think this is a really important thing, you know, competency to me is a scale, okay? You know, incompetent to very competent, however you want to do it, inexperienced, intermediate, expert level, whatever, you recognize where you are. So, and that's the first thing. Where are you? How are you currently performing? And whilst those labels may change, that level of competency is your baseline, and you want to understand what it is you can do to actually build on that baseline. So what is your current level of performance? Well, firstly, I think we've got to recognize that actually we're all on a digital journey, whether we appreciate it or not. And we've all quite significantly moved from paper to digital platforms anyway. And email's an example, you know, we don't write too many letters anymore and stick them in the post, you know. But I think if we just stop and just think about email for a moment, you know, it's a frustration for me, and I think for a lot of people, about just dealing with email. So whilst it might have actually enabled us to increase our speed of communication and potentially the volume with which we can communicate people, it's questionable whether it's actually improved our productivity and made for a healthier life. So if we look at what I said about what we're looking to achieve, has it really achieved those two aims? And I would suggest that it hasn't, and in fact, it's probably had an opposite effect. And that's because it's imposed without really understanding how a lot of these communications need to work and what we need to do. And a lot of tools give you more notifications, which cluster up your email even further. So it doesn't necessarily add value in the way that we need it to. And I would suggest that that's one area that we need to individually and collectively look to address that competency. But in a similar way, I think it also sort of constrains, or it's inefficient. It means that we're not learning, or I don't see that there's a lot of learning in the way that we use email within an organization that enables us to be more effective. We just keep pushing more and more messages out, etc. So I think there could be feedback loops even in there to look at and address what we could do, how it impacts the way that we work and how we can improve. So what am I saying here? Have a baseline, understand what that baseline, what your baseline level of competency is. Then have a view of, right, okay, if you're at an ad hoc level at the moment, well, what's the next step up? You want to be more advanced. So how do you get to that level? Have a view what that looks like, and then, you know, articulate that in a way that makes sense for the business, and see what we can do. As I say, within construction, we're going to have this requirement of legislation to demonstrate your competency, to demonstrate your golden thread of information. So there's two immediate obvious opportunities to look at, right, how do we do this? What is it we can do, and how do we make sure that we can deliver on that? And linking those two bits really is then having an action plan that works, brings those, that enables you to work towards your desired level of competencies. And I suppose, bearing in mind what I've said about people firefighting, and if people are listening to this and thinking, yeah, it's all good management speak, I'm sure that's exactly what they think. I don't actually want this to be, and I don't think you need to be overly elaborate. You know, part of this is just taking a pause, actually just looking at what it is, actually starting to develop a plan that enables you to continuously improve. And really just understanding how you are currently performing is an important thing. You know, you might recognize that you're quite good in some areas, but not so good in other areas, even if you thought you were. So just having that audit is an important thing. I suppose there's much that I could actually add to this, but what I would say, you know, is just consider measuring your performance, trying to get some transparency, some candid transparency over your performance to understand, and good measures that really sort of demonstrate how you are performing and where you aren't performing. And in that vein, then consider how you actually incorporate an effective feedback loop to understand where you haven't necessarily been successful, where you can learn from failure. So I think that's probably said enough on those sort of things. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess my next question is, where does the Building Boardroom Academy digital construction course fit into that? How can it help people improve their digital competency?
Okay. So the digital construction course is a series of posts really designed to challenge the participant and reader to go through the steps mentioned above. So it guides you through those steps. And what we've really looked to do is to provide some clarity over what we mean by digital construction, and also to encourage readers to appreciate what is involved in taking those steps to develop their digital competencies. So that's what we've talked about. And I think our approach here is often really not to provide too much information, but to provide a context, to ask questions at the end of each post that get the participants to go off and actually answer those questions. And I think whether they can answer it in their entirety or not is not so important, but to recognize that actually then there's a gap in their understanding that they can then start to work on. And I think that's the important thing. So I think what we're trying to set up here is that we're really looking to be a guide specifically for those that agree the future is digital and actually don't know where to start. So it's really bringing the parts that we've just talked about together in a format of a series of articles and posts that take them through, give them some actions, and then hopefully come back with some questions and take that forward from there.
With regards to the content you're producing for the course, what are kind of some of your main aims, and what topics can we expect you to cover in the future?
Okay, so in terms of the main aim really is to provide some information for participants on the course and really to encourage them to take action.
Yeah.
So in a way, we can all read something, but actually how much you learn from that is actually taking the action. So we can explain things, but the real learning really then comes from individuals taking action. We can always provide more in terms of content, and somebody can always ask for more questions, and I'm more than happy to respond on that. But I think what I would like to see is that we're giving direction. An aim really is to give some direction that can inspire the participants to take that action and to come back and share their experiences and ask questions. Again, I like to sort of create an environment that's not too threatening, to be open and encouraging people to come in. So, you know, that's part of this. I certainly see a lot of content in this digital space is written without really understanding what somebody without a lot of experience what their experience is and what they need to do. So it's really a series of small steps that help them move in that direction. So we haven't really talked about technology in all that we've been talking about. Part of this is really trying to set people up. Obviously, technology is a part of this, but what's coming next in the next few posts will be more about technology. We will touch on that, but ultimately, I don't want people to think BIM technology. I want people to think BIM digital construction. Actually, it's rethinking the way that we work, recognizing that the future is going to be digital, but what is it we've got to do to put the right things in place that enable us to get there? So that's hopefully what it's about, and that's what the rest of the course is trying to drive towards.
What can people expect to gain from utilising the resources available in the Academy?
Okay, So I think what I want people to gain, as I sort of said there, I'm trying to recognize that people haven't, why haven't they already started? What's going to enable them to start? And I want them to gain a bit of confidence from reading this resource, that actually it's not big and scary. You know, I'm not suggesting that we're going to set up a platform like Netflix or Uber or anything like this. We're going to take small steps to develop that. The digital competency that you've already got some level of digital competency. You know, we all experience it. You know, we've all got digital phones, we've all got smartphones. You know, 15 years ago nobody had a smartphone, but we're all capable of using it now, and I think that's in part what we need to do. So I want them to appreciate that, you know, that many of those misconceptions haven't been that helpful, but change is within their control.
Yeah.
And I suppose when we talk about transformation, and you know, it's a big word, transformation, but actually what I would prefer people to consider is it's not one big bang of a change. Actually, it's going to be sort of consistent incremental improvements that lead to that transformation, and having a guide, having an approach that can drive towards that. Somebody, we were talking, you know, it's a little bit like when you're on couch to 5K. You know you want to be fitter and healthier. What is it you've got to do to actually get off the couch? And you don't run 5K straight away. You know, you start off by running a little bit, or walking even. You don't have to run. You know, there is no requirement to run, but it's small incremental steps over a period of time means that, you know, in 10-12 weeks you can look back and actually say, wow, 12 weeks ago I couldn't get off the couch, and now look at me, I'm running 5K. So what I want to do is try and give people that confidence that that's what they can do. They can take these steps and build up something that gets them up to the next level, and then hopefully have got some sort of framework that enables them to continue that improvement and look and understand, well, okay, what is it we've got to do to drive and use technology? And I mentioned misconceptions there. I think the misconception is this is all going to cost money. Well, actually, I think if you actually take a step back and look and do some of the things that I say, well, actually, I think there's efficiencies that can quite comfortably be made that generate you income, savings, profits that enable you then to invest in the future, and that will happen. So you know, recognize that we are inefficient in the way that we operate, but actually just trying to do some things that actually improve your efficiency can then realize some savings. Hopefully, it might just reduce your working week from 70 hours down to 50 or 60, but you know, it's that sort of concept that we've got to do. So, and I think the other sort of key thing that I want them to get is to feel supported. They're not alone, you know, and being part of a community. There's plenty of other people out there in exactly the same position as them. So we can build this community in that sort of way, then hopefully they can learn from others as well.
Yeah, it's definitely the small steps, isn't it? Lots of small steps lead to big change. I have one final question for you. And why would you encourage people to join the Academy's community? What would you say are the big benefits of it?
Okay, another good question. And I think it's really just picking up on what I've just mentioned. You know, people aren't alone. You know, there are many others in a similar sort of position, and they're looking for guidance and support. And I think if we can create that community where people can share their experiences, discuss the challenges they're facing, for me, that's actually one of the best ways of learning. And that's often what I do with the experiences. So I very much try and not push too much information. I really try and get people discussing and working. So I think in that way, what we've done with the posts, you know, when you come in and you see those posts, you'll see that what we've done is to try and make them deliberately digestible. So they're concise pieces of writing. They're not overly long, and there is significantly much more knowledge and experience that can be shared on this. And at the right time, I absolutely love responding to people's questions. And I think when people have got those questions, it's a way of actually giving them a lot more, and they can benefit from my experience of others, and that way that they can be on that journey of continuous improvement.
Thank you very much. I think that's all we have time for. But thank you so much, Rob. It was really lovely to speak to you and to hear more about the Building Boardroom Academy Digital Construction course.